Adrian Bijan is a professor at Duke University who was born and raised in Romania. He has contributed to the scientific community by researching in a variety of topics, including thermodynamics, heat transfer, fluid mechanics, convection, porous media. Recently, Bijan has developed the constructural law of design in nature. And since 2001, he has been considered among the most highly cited authors worldwide in engineering. He has received 16 honorary doctorates from universities in 11 different countries. From the political subject, we can see the early people of Eastern Europe from their own settlements, which may have been taken over by various people and other religions. Later on, when Romania became its own country within the Ottoman Empire and the Declaration of Independence under Prince Carol I, Romania has seen monarchies, royal dictatorships, royal coups, and a communist-dominated government. And recently, they've created a new constitution ousting this communist government.
On the uneven bars.
Chris, this could be the highlight of the compulsory event. She is one of the technically strongest, best gymnasts that I've ever seen. Watch this. Beautiful rhythm, right to a handstand. Oh, look at that amplitude. Ooh. She is really moving well. Another handstand. Look at that, right to the handstand. Gorgeous routine, beautiful, and the crowd loved it.
It wasn't just the crowd that loved it.
And it is
A perfect 10 on the first line.
No gymnast in Olympic history had ever received a perfect score, and to do it with a compulsory routine was phenomenal. It brought the crowd to its feet and brought Nadia back on stage for a curtain call.
Romania is a great country to study for history, as it's a country that's been taken over many times and has changed political power in a variety of ways. One can study the Romanian history before the country was even called Romania. We can study their journey from nomadic peoples and to its ousting of communist ruler Nicolae Ceausescu. They've even kept intact a 900-year-old town in central Romania called Transylvania. This is historically significant as its architecture is still in place and people can still visit it today, and has contributed to the phenomenon of Dracula. In the visual arts subject, Romania has produced one of the most acclaimed modern sculptors. His name is Constantine Brâncuși. He was a central figure in the modern movement and a pioneer of abstraction. His sculptures are noted for their visual elegance and sensitive use of materials, combining with the directness of pleasant carving with sophistication of the Parisian avant-garde movement.
Value Romanian traditions. I've always loved them since I was a little kid. Like, I love the different things that we do for different days, such as name days. We have name days that are for a saint, but sometimes it ends up being bigger than your actual birthday, which I find funny. So I really value family and traditions together. So just basically Romania as a country, and I feel very proud and very strongly about where I come from, although people might see it as a negative place to come from, but I don't think so at all. So holidays, name days, traditions, food, I value.
Well, I personally learn best by visually seeing what or how to do something or to learn something. And I like to get things done now, not later, but I do tend to procrastinate sometimes and stuff happens.
I would say I'm very much a visual learner. Usually which is something I just became familiar with. If I see something, I will remember it right away. Which is weird to me. When I was younger though, my mom, because she was not a writer, but she liked to write things down when she was learning, and she thought through repetition, that's how you get better and better at it. And from what I remember, that just made me bored, and it just didn't help me at all. But I think that's how she did things when she was younger, so she thought that it would be the same for me. But I consider myself being pretty lucky with being a visual learner, especially with my languages, just because I remember doing vocabulary in my Spanish classes, and I would have to look over the sheet just once, and then that's it.
Eram la școală în România, mi plăcea când profesorii mi explicau sau când citeam, încercam să vizualizez ceea ce învățam. Și încercam să fac conexiuni ca să pot ține minte mai bine, să înțeleg fenomenele mai bine.
Growing up as a Romanian?
The tradition that I love the most, I've always loved it more than Christmas, was St. Nicholas Day, which basically what happens is you put your boots or your shoes in the front of the house, and St. Nicholas, which isn't Santa Claus, put that out there, comes to you and brings you presents. Usually it's chocolate or it's food, and if you aren't good, you get a stick. And I think I got the stick once, but then the next day I found something in my shoes. But I don't really know where it actually comes from, but it's just a tradition that I always love. It's on December 6th, and I remember even now as being a 22-year-old, I still get presents, and I love coming home to see.
What is your work habit? Are you the type of person that wants to finish the job now or later?
I always need to finish things I start right away. I'm not sure why. I think that's just the way I was brought up. And when I was younger, my mom would actually make me do homework, and then she would make me do extra homework for the homework that I had for school. So I always had to sit there and finish the job over and over again to like be done school, to be done that part so I could go and play outside. So I think through training of having to do things and finish it right away, I think that's just how I've started becoming. But I'm not sure if it's a combination of the two, but for the most part, I like starting things right away and then finishing them right away. So not the last minute kind of person.
While interviewing Simona, who was a teacher in Romania for 10 years and then came to Canada, we asked if Canadian body language is different from Romania. She responded that it is basically the same in the way in which we express ourselves, but there are some differences. Basically, people sit cross-armed in Romania, and it is completely fine. Nobody would question it. But when she came to Canada, she noticed that people had told her that it seemed as if she was being distant and cold and wouldn't want to have a conversation with another person as she was crossing her arms, keeping her distance away. Another body language difference she noticed was the fact that she would keep her hands behind her back, which in Romania is completely fine, but in Canada it may seem pompous. And she was asked if she was a Romanian teacher back home just because she had a pompous look about her, which was weird. Also, marking in red is something that she always did. And here, however, we know that it is seen as a bad thing because it sounds like you're putting people down. But in Romania, it is completely fine. It is normal to do so. She says that it is the idea of handling criticism and not the color of the pen. As a teacher in Romania, she believes that school here can drastically improve. She believes that allowing for more competition academically is one way in which students will achieve higher academic purpose, and also for us as teachers to set higher standards than the ones we have right now.
Cultural values, traditions, cross-cultural communication, learning styles, multicultural instruction, and contributions. It is important to have knowledge of students' cultural backgrounds. Some things that you can do within the classroom are work with students to develop family history projects in which students explore their cultural background and share them with the class. World maps that highlight students' countries of origin. Signs or banners can welcome students in the different languages they speak. Posters can depict people of various cultural groups, but be aware of stereotypical representations. Display books that promote themes of diversity, tolerance, and community. Be clear with your expectations, and learn to count to 10 in different languages.
Perhaps the largest difference between Romanian and English is that Romanian is a less direct language. Conversations are expected to meander. Details would be included in these conversations that would seem superfluous to the English speaker. But to be overly direct would be to be rude. While the language is indirect, it is still permissible to use imperative statements when one wants another to do something. However, these imperative statements will often be softened. This softening can occur through uses of phrases such as please, by making it seem as though there are other options, even though there is implication that there are not, and by using we statements. By this I mean, rather than saying, do this, I might say, we ought to do this. The indirectness of Romanian was particularly clear in more formal situations, such as an office environment. When asking someone to do something, one would have to spend some time working their way to the actual request. Other aspects of this more formal communication would be an unwillingness to address someone by their first name, and an unwillingness to use humor. These conventions have, however, been changing over the last 20 years with the fall of communism and increasing Western influences. Conversation has become more direct. People will use one another's first name, and people are more willing to use humor. One may still slip into this more extreme formal language when addressing a figure who is particularly important. In addition to being more indirect, Romanian is less verbal of a language. Gesticulation, for example, is very important to one's communication. Moreover, the language is highly contextual. That is to say that in Romanian, there are things which can go unsaid, but that two native speakers will have understood to be implied by the other things happening in the conversation.
One aspect of Romanian culture with a high potential for negative effects in Canadian education is the significance of ethnicity in social interaction. As one Romanian-born cultural interpreter describes on the Government of Canada's Centre for Intercultural Learning website, ethnic origins hold a lot of weight in judging others. There is historical resentment toward Hungarian, Jewish, and Gypsy minorities that is not felt toward Ukrainians, Germans, Turkish Muslims, or Tatars who are less numerous. Russians are feared. Such attitudes may pose a problem when interacting with students and teachers, particularly in multicultural Canadian schools. In regards to work styles, a cultural interpreter states, written communication is lacking and planning and respecting deadlines is not always taken seriously. Within the context of the Canadian classroom, this behavior may not be readily accepted by teachers. Written communication, such as essays or other written forms of evaluation, are standard practice. Furthermore, deadlines are typically firm and penalties are given for lateness. In most cases, written communication, planning, and deadlines are significant factors of academic achievement. There are also certain patterns of communication found in Romanian culture that differ from Canadian social interaction. As a cultural interpreter explains, the tone they use is so lively that foreigners often get the impression that the speakers are arguing, which is quite often not the case. This has the potential to be negatively perceived, as misinterpretation is possible when viewing this communication style from the vantage point of our own. Communication within the classroom may be affected, as the tone and volume of one's speech is important to understanding emotion, intent, and attitude. One aspect of nonverbal communication that may also pose a problem in the Canadian context is eye contact. An interpreter explains, compared to North Americans, Romanians focus less on the people to whom they are speaking. This often gives the impression that they are not paying attention. Within the Canadian classrooms, students' level of eye contact is important to most teachers. Students are often called out or punished for not constantly focusing on their teacher with their eyes. Even though the student may be paying attention, people within Canadian culture often require eye contact in order to feel a sense of assurance that they are being listened to and respected. Another cultural value that differs from the Canadian tradition is the attitude toward lateness. An interpreter explains, compared to the North American outlook, time is seen as being more flexible. Being a half an hour late is seen as normal and is known as the academic half hour, which is totally acceptable. As many of us know, punctuality is highly valued in both the workplace and classroom. Repetitive lateness is not accepted and can cause high tensions between teachers, students, and parents. The education system in Romania is structured much differently than Canada. Secondary school splits off into two separate directions, vocational school and regular high school. For students immigrating to Canada during their teenage years, this drastic shift could be detrimental to their learning. For example, if a student who has spent their high school career in a vocational school comes to a Canadian high school, they would suddenly be evaluated as though they had been on a more academic track throughout their teenage years. The knowledge gained at vocational schools would not be easily transferred to a traditional Canadian context. This could potentially result in stunted student success and decreased student engagement.